16th. And if anybody is in Indiana, or for your Hoosier listeners, and if they're interested in going to the Democratic Party convention, in most counties there are openings right now. Not in all counties, but in most counties there are openings. And county party chairmen can, have the authority to put people into those openings, so they can contact their county party chairman about that. They can also contact my campaign if they have any questions. And, we also are familiar with that process, of course.
That's excellent. We do have listeners in Indiana, so guys, listen up. Should take those spots.
Yeah, come. It's gonna be a lot. We're gonna have a lot of fun on June 16th.
Well, is there anything else that you want to make sure that people know about you or Indiana before we wrap up?
I am very proud of Indiana, and I think that it is a state that next time you drive through it, stop and hang out for a little while. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. I also think that it is one of the most, for people who are concerned about the direction of our country right now, which I'm sure is all of your listeners and certainly is me as well. Politically, Indiana is a critical state this year. We have one of the most competitive U.S. Senate races in the country. We're going to have competitive congressional races in several districts. I think the Secretary of State's race is absolutely critical, and it's a race that we can win and really do some things to make our election system more fair. So I would encourage people to pay attention to the good candidates that we have running all around Indiana and the state in general. For all your friends in Chicago, it's a 45-minute drive over if they want to come knock on some doors or make some phone calls. And if anybody wants to learn about my campaign, my website is harper4indiana.com. And we're also on Facebook, and I'd encourage people to check that out and reach out.
Awesome. And we will put links to all that up on our website as well.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
It was great to hear more good things about Indiana, and I promise we will spend more time stopping and spending time there and not just driving through.
Very good.
Hi, it's Carolyn.
And Vanessa.
From Not Another X-Files podcast.
We're the female-led X-Files podcast you didn't even know you were looking for.
We've got plenty of opportunities for nostalgia, conspiracies, forbidden romance, and plenty of laughs.
It's true. Come on over to our place in Vancouver, Canada, and revisit your favorite 90s sci-fi TV show.
You'll be glad you stopped by. You can find us on all your favorite podcast spots.
And on the web at notanotherxfpod.libsyn.com.
Bye.
Bye. Music for this promo by Purple Planet.
Hi, everyone. This is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics, and I'm here in this segment with Courtney Trich, who is running for Congress from the 3rd District in Indiana. Hello, Courtney.
Hi. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. Can you, just to give us some context, tell us where exactly the 3rd District is and if there are any towns or things that people would have heard of in the district?
We are in the northeast corner of Indiana, and Fort Wayne, which is the second largest city in Indiana, is the main metro area. And it's made up of about pieces and parts of 12 counties. It's been gerrymandered just a bit.
That's a common theme that we hear virtually traveling around the country. And so what is your background, and why did you decide to run for Congress this year?
I grew up here in Fort Wayne, and I moved back here about 11 years ago and spent 10 of those 11 years here working in community and economic development before leaving to start my own business. And I worked in regional economic development, so worked with 11 counties, which were roughly the same footprint of the Congressional District. And, we worked with mayors and commissioners and business leaders, and we got a lot done. I had the opportunity to help lead some large-scale initiatives like what we called the Regional Cities Initiative, where we won $42 million in state funding to invest in our community. So I kind of had the background and experience from a professional standpoint, and people have been asking me to run for office for years, and I have been politely declining. But this year definitely feels a little different. And I was actually really motivated to run based on some of the women in my life. I'm 40 years old, and I had a sister named Pam who passed away 8 years ago when she was 39 years old. And just the idea of me being able to turn 40 and her not just really weighed heavily on me. And so I spent that year of being 39 thinking about what does it mean for me to turn 40? What kind of difference should I be making in my community? Was I doing enough in the world of economic development? And during that year, my mom passed away also. And so it just, when you have a grief experience like that, it just really makes you rethink things and think about what's important in your life and what's worth fighting for. And my mom always said, you don't have a right to complain about something unless you've stood up and done everything you can to try and change it. And so that's basically what I'm trying to do here in 2018.
Well, that's great. I'm sorry to hear about your sister and your mom, but that's really powerful that you can turn that into doing something and trying to make a difference. I want to hear a little bit about, so we know where the 3rd District is now, but what are the kinds of things that people in the 3rd District do? What drives them? What issues are they really interested in? So this is up near the border with Ohio.
And Michigan, yeah.
And Michigan, okay, yeah. So, and this is an area that I will admit I've only ever driven through. I drive from Chicago to Ohio and back a lot and haven't really spent any time there. So, is this industrial? Is it rural? What are the kinds of things people do in this district?
We've made a lot of changes and a lot of progress in the past decade, especially when it comes to downtown Fort Wayne and the downtowns around the region. About a quarter of the economy is manufacturing, so it's still very heavily manufacturing, but there's this great mix of what's happening in the urban environment and new industries that are emerging, as well as very balanced with the rural counties as well. There's an Amish population. There's a lot of tourism. There's a lakes region. And so it's very, very interconnected. And Warsaw is also a part of the region, which is known as the orthopedic capital of the world. So very heavily medical device as well.
Interesting. And so you have been working a lot in economic development, so I assume that is an issue that drives you. But what are the other issues that you're really focused on in this campaign?
Well, so as I travel around the district, it seems to me that healthcare is still top of mind for everyone, right? That wasn't exactly solved last year. And, that was a big driver for me as I watched 13 Republican men sitting behind closed doors talking about a bill last year that would have, affected 1/5 of the economy with that Republican health care bill, which thank goodness didn't pass. But everywhere I go, people keep talking about what are we going to do? What are the next steps? And my opponent, of course, just wants to repeal it and be done. And to me, that's not exactly problem solving, just throwing 20 million people off of their insurance. And, we have a large opioid crisis here in this state. And so taking away the Medicaid expansion here wouldn't exactly help us with that. And so people are looking for answers on healthcare. Public education is another huge part of my platform. And again, my opponent would like to continue to funnel funds out of our public education system and, put it into for-profit schools where there is zero accountability of those taxpayer dollars. But I also am interested, just from an economic standpoint in general, on clean energy. There's been a lot of talk on, how do we get back to coal with the current administration? And my opponent is well funded by the Koch brothers. So he also kind of shares that commitment to oil and gas, whereas from an economic standpoint, I'm looking at where are the jobs of tomorrow coming from? And solar jobs right now are outpacing the rest of the U.S. economy by about the margin of 12-1. So I like to look at where are the jobs coming from? How do we prepare for that? And make sure that we have the best industry mix and talent to match in this region.
And is that something that's really growing in that district in general?
I don't know that it's specific to this district. I think that as we look at our manufacturing skill set, there's no reason that as, Tesla announces that it wants to build state-of-the-art solar roofs, that we can't be manufacturing those here in our district. So there's a lot of room for growth there. And I think that that's not just local to the district. I think that that's really a national issue.
And there tends to be a lot of space for things like wind farms. We noted in another segment that there's a very large wind farm in Indiana already.
Yes, I will tell you in the 3rd District, we don't have wind farms. And right over the border in Ohio, there are a bunch of them. And so obviously the wind doesn't stop at the border. And to me, as we're addressing things like climate change and its effect on our farmers and our rural communities, there's a lot of money and a lot of stable income that can be made by farmers by leasing some of their land. So even as, crops and weather change, they would have stable income to rely on. So I feel like there's a really solid economic argument to be made to support that.
So let's talk about the race a little bit. Your opponent is a first-term congressman, but he won by a pretty big margin. So, and this is a district that's been rated as safely Republican. So what do you see as sort of your path to victory? How can you convince the voters of the 3rd District to vote for you?
Well, it's interesting because we haven't really had a viable candidate for about a decade on this side of the aisle when it comes to this race. And so the actual election has been taking place in the primary, in the Republican primary, which leads us to have the furthest right person possible, so not representing the whole district very well. And so one of the reasons I wanted to run was to be able to have this conversation. And I'm actually a lifelong independent. This is the first time I've declared a party. And a lot of people, because of my work in economic development, assumed I was Republican. And so there's been a lot of positive response to that. So I can tell you we have over 1,500 grassroots donors right now. I mean, the momentum that we are building on the ground here is incredible, and I'm continuously floored by it. We just had an event the other night in a very heavily Republican area, and some Republicans came to this Democratic event to hear me speak because they are so frustrated with the Republican Party. And they left with yard signs and Trich for Congress information, and they were excited. And so I think it's just giving people another viable option. And, the last quarter of 2017, we actually outraised the incumbent. We were one of about 40 candidates in the country that were able to do that. So when you say, oh yeah, like that's just a really Republican district, I think it may have just been a really Republican district because there weren't other options. And so now with, that and starting to realize on the national radar what we've been able to do, people have been taking a second look at this district.
And so one of the things I like to ask people is just sort of what does campaigning look like? And so you started to say that a little bit, that you have events where Republicans are actually coming to. What does the process of running for office look like in a place like the 3rd District? What all kinds of events are you doing? Who are you talking to? What does that sort of look like on the ground?
I think it's a lot of hands-on campaigning, a lot of grassroots with individuals, because once, you might say I'm a Republican, but then once we start talking about the issues, there's a lot more agreement and a lot more common ground than they originally thought if we can just actually have the conversation. So we're in the middle of a 12-county listening tour right now. So we're making stops all over the district, talking to people about what's important to them. And then we also do, because I was interested in running a non-traditional campaign out of the gate, we've also had some large-scale events to just build momentum and excitement around the campaign. And so, for example, we just had an event called The Power of Her Story, and we invited women from around the district to come share their stories of how they have overcome obstacles and how we can empower ourselves in 2018. And we had such an amazing, diverse group of women. We sold out. And it was just people, and there were Republicans and Democrats in the room, and there were people sharing stories from everything from, we have a large Burmese population here, about what it was like from her traveling here from Burma, what her life is like now, and everything from that to a 16-year-old girl who lives in a town called New Haven, just outside of Fort Wayne, who was talking about how she was getting bullied in her classes because she was supporting the Women's March and women's rights, and how the boys in her school were treating her. She actually reached out to my campaign and said she felt like she had lost her voice, and how could, can she work with me? And I wanted to help her get her voice back. And so we shared that story with this group. And it's just been a really powerful, empowering time as a woman in particular to be involved in politics and to be able to share in some of these types of events.
That's excellent. I really like that idea of having women's voices in the mix. And I think it's so important that so many women are running for office this year. Obviously, you know, women have been severely underrepresented in Congress in general. And, you know, that's problematic, as you were saying.